I do have a lot of nightmares. They have to do with what happened out there, most of them.
I remember the teacher, I remember him lecturing us, and I looked out the window and all of a sudden I started seeing things that weren't there. I really thought my rapist was there. I really thought he was going to come in the window and get me.
I really didn't understand what road rage was. I couldn't understand why people would get so angry, and I found myself really furious at people who would do things, not even necessarily cutting me off and being dangerous, but just stupid things.
Back in the days when I was going through what I call my Chernobyl period, I slept 1 or 2 hours every other day, and I never slept without a loaded gun and a survival knife near me.
A lady was coming towards me in a hurry, and she dove right into her purse. And the first thing I did instantly was, I need to protect my nieces. I started scooting behind the pillar, started moving away, and I instantly went reaching for my hip, realized, wait, I don't have a knife or a gun. And this happened in 3 seconds, and it was in my head. All I was thinking was gun, 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 gun. She's gonna pull a gun on me. And all she did was get her cell phone.
The emotional numbness, I think, is the most, it'll just tear away all the relationships in your life.
I don't want to have to try and explain it to people. Didn't want to have to go over my experiences every single time to try and let somebody know. So it's much easier just not to have friends.
You know what we're about to do? We're about to get real. We're about to have conversations that Christians have behind closed doors, the scary ones. The ones that make you feel uncomfortable. That's where we're going. Why? Because we're family. Ustedes son mi familia.
So this is the Brian and Janelle podcast. She's Janelle, and I'm Brian. If you don't want to miss anything, all you have to do is hit the subscribe button to get a notification whenever we drop a new episode. This is the Brian and Janelle podcast.
If you're going around saying everybody else has a problem and it's not me, chances are, yeah, you're the one with the problem.
We're so glad to have back on the show. It's been a while, but Jonathan Holmes is counselor and director of strategic initiatives at Fieldstone Counseling. Welcome back, Jonathan.
Thanks, Brian. Janelle, it's good to be back with you guys.
I'm so glad we're talking about PTSD because I think it's tossed around so much that it's almost begun to lose its meaning. So can you just bring us to Psychology 101? What is post-traumatic stress disorder?
Well, PTSD, I think, is like you said, many people understand it. It gets a little bit lost in translation. You know, people maybe watch a movie or something and say, oh, I have PTSD or that triggered me.
Yeah.
But in terms of what we're all going through right now, PTSD happens when people experience a traumatic event, and that traumatic event can look in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it can be abuse, sometimes it can be war. Veterans obviously are probably the group that are most well known to us with PTSD, but also people who are on the front line right now who are experiencing and seeing an enormous amount of loss. Those are also traumatic events that when you come into contact with that on a minute-by-minute, day-by-day basis, it definitely has an effect on how your body responds, how your body operates, and then also mentally and emotionally too. So when we think about PTSD, a phrase at least that I've seen in a lot of different articles in Post is just this idea of collective trauma, that all of us really collectively are going through a bit of trauma right now. All of us are experiencing a type of loss, some greater than others, but it's still loss nonetheless.
So how do you recognize it? I'm especially thinking of people that are out there. Do you just wait? If you're a family member, do you just wait till it shows up? Is there anything that they can do now?
And Janelle, I'm so glad you're bringing that up, because it's not just healthcare workers, it's truck drivers, it's grocery store workers. I talked to a grocery store worker the other day, and she just said she goes, from the time I clock in to the time I clock out, it's a little bit of a nightmare. I mean, people trying to get food, people trying to, come up and ask questions, and, people have masks and people don't. It's a lot to handle. And when you're on a 12 or a 16 or an 18-hour shift without an extended break, those things can be difficult. So one of the things I think that we want to encourage people to do is to talk about what's going on below the surface. And that's a dynamic that we call affect labeling. And so one of the things that we can do is help people name what they're experiencing and name what they're feeling. Sometimes I think a lot of times trauma can kind of present as maybe fear or anxiety or anger or frustration. So you might see a person might just see, man, you seem really uptight, or you seem really anxious, or you seem really irritated or irritable. But if you kind of scratch below the surface and just probe a little bit, what you realize is there's just this heightened state of trauma that the person is experiencing. And so moving towards them and not moving away from them, that might be the inclination. If you get a little bit of a prickly response, you might move away. But what people actually need during this time is connection, and they need relationship more than ever.
One of the oddities I remember learning about years ago, and then I finally experienced it when I went through a serious bout with anxiety, is this idea of a psychosomatic situation where our minds can impact our physical body response. Just shows the power of God's creation in the mind. But what are some of the actual physical symptoms somebody might experience who has PTSD?
Some of the things that you might feel are just this overwhelming sense that your body can't move. You might feel numb. You might feel paralyzed. A lot of times people with PTSD experience what we call dissociation, where you just, people might describe it as, I feel like I have this out-of-body experience where you don't feel connected to yourself. You don't feel connected to your emotions. It might be difficult for you to focus. You might freeze up. And that's because, Brian, as you noted, that when we're encountering these traumatic experiences, that psychosomatically something is happening in our brain. And the sympathetic nervous system, that part of our brain that is the fight or flight, it's really designed and intended to keep us safe and to keep us out of harm's way. But oftentimes what happens in times of trauma is that we are staying in that state, that high anxiety state, for a long and an extended period of time. And so it leads to very heightened experiences of trauma and anxiety for people. And so what we need to do is just be attuned to some of those things. And again, it might be difficult right now to enter into like a normal counseling relationship because of some of the restrictions, but I would definitely encourage frontline workers, essential workers who are experiencing some of those physical and emotional symptoms to seek out help from your church, or do some type of telehealth counseling. But definitely don't feel like you have to suffer alone, or that you have to be alone during this difficult time.
What about people who may be suddenly experiencing like headaches or indigestion or like sore muscles or something? Can we ever attribute those symptoms to PTSD of sorts?
Yes, I definitely think you can. And I think that with a trained counselor, working through some more of those physical symptoms would be good, and to try to evaluate what are some of the symptoms that would be more related to PTSD and what might just be typical psychosomatic responses to anxiety, like carrying a lot of tension, or neck pain, or having that racing heartbeat, or noticing an increased rate in your blood pressure, or just that sense where, man, I just feel really on edge, or sometimes people will start sweating, or have inexplicable muscle pain. Sometimes that can be more anxiety, but oftentimes, like you guys are noting, it can be related and associated with PTSD. And that's where you just, again, there shouldn't be any shame with getting help. You're in this particular spot. Get help, reach out to someone. Don't suffer alone during this time.
Now, you've mentioned anxiety and PTSD. How are those connected and or not connected, Jonathan?
Well, the difference between PTSD and anxiety would be with anxiety, you might not have some type of traumatic event or been witness to some type of traumatic event to have anxiety. And again, anxiety issues are the number one mental health issue that Americans face. About 1 in 4 Americans have some type of anxiety-related symptoms or anxiety-type disorder. So that would be a little bit of the difference, that not everybody who has anxiety also struggles with PTSD, but anxiety would be a feature for people who struggle with PTSD. It would be the sense where even sometimes they feel heightened states of anxiety, and then maybe other times where they actually don't feel anxious at all, where that sense of detachment or that sense of numbness comes in. And so if a person did experience, say, extended periods of, say, hypervigilance or being in a state where they just felt anxious all the time, I definitely think that it would be good for them to speak to a medical professional or a licensed therapist to be able to work through some of those different issues to see what's related to the PTSD and what's more related to the anxiety. But either way, there's definitely room and movement to get help for both of those issues.
I love that you're offering the opportunity to get telehealth, and I know other organizations do that, but we're assuming everyone is willing to get help or recognizes that they need help. So if a spouse is listening or a family member and they're recognizing some of the symptoms that you're sharing, but they have a family member that doesn't want to get help or is saying, I'm fine, there's nothing wrong with me, what do you say to them? What can you do?
Well, Janelle, that's a great question. For a lot of people who are sheltering in place, who are quarantining with someone who maybe is exhibiting some of these different symptoms, but doesn't feel comfortable getting help, maybe doesn't feel like they have access to be able to get the help, it can be really hard. It can be frustrating. The first thing I would say is don't take it personally. Don't take it as a rejection of you. So you might be reaching out to your husband or reaching out to your wife and saying, hey, I really think you could benefit from getting help. And it can almost feel like a rejection of you if they say, well, no, I don't want to do that, or it wouldn't work. So don't try to take it personally, but find other ways then, if they're not open to getting help, to actually play the role, at least for the time being, of a counselor, of a good friend. Again, one of the things that we see in counseling is that oftentimes what makes the difference so much isn't the counselor's credentials, all those are important, or his or her education, but it's simply being able to build a relationship of trust. That's the number one indicator of a successful therapeutic relationship. And so what are some ways that you as an individual, if that person doesn't want to go to counseling, how can you move towards them? How can you love them? And again, that's difficult during a season like this because, nobody wants to move towards a porcupine. So if a person's a little bit prickly and is trying to push you away, it can seem counterintuitive to move towards that. And so, sometimes a person needs to be able to push past what I call that pain threshold of those initial negative responses of, no, I don't want help. But what they actually might be doing is signaling you for help. They might actually be saying, no, please move towards me, but they just don't know how to put words to it. So another thing that you might do is maybe give them some different words to describe their feelings. Say, hey, let me ask you a few questions. Are you feeling anxious right now? Do you feel tense? Do you feel, have you been having trouble sleeping? But try giving them some different phrases or words to eventually pull them out, to help them understand, listen, that talking about it, just simply naming some of the things that you're going through is actually a really positive step towards healing and towards restoration.
I've been reading a lot of articles that are from people in your field, actually. Again, Jonathan Holmes is a counselor and works with Fieldstone Counseling, saying that there's a coming mental health epidemic. Yeah. If not, we're already in the midst of it. I'd love to hear your analysis and reaction to that concept.
It is one of the things I think that slowly you are starting to hear more and more things about. Time Magazine just a few days ago released an article saying that a lot of research models are showing that there could be as many as 150,000 additional people who could die from mental health-related concerns associated with COVID. So you think about the current death toll right now with COVID, we're still under that 150,000 mark. Imagine doubling that number just the people who are isolated. I know even in our own practice, we've had issues with suicide, issues with abuse. Those are all incredibly heightened during this time. And so I do think that that's something that a lot of people are not thinking about, right? We think about the physical aspects of COVID, but the mental health aspects of how COVID is affecting all of us, especially frontline workers, it is wreaking an inestimable amount of damage and harm on people's mental and spiritual and emotional health. And I read a recent article about some healthcare workers in Italy who are now at least maybe on the other end of the crisis over there. And people were saying they are burned out. The healthcare workers there are lonely. They feel isolated. They said, we started off as heroes and now we're forgotten, right? There's really not a need for them anymore. And so I do think it is of critical importance that we stay attuned to our frontline workers, our essential workers, because they are experiencing a level of trauma and a level of loss that I think many of us are a bit distanced to. And so to be able to just keep that in mind, to keep them in prayer, but also to offer practical help for them, I think is going to be really critical for us as we move forward.
I'd also love to get your reaction to a little theory of mine, because I'm not the expert, you are. I think I've seen a lot of people play the comparison game in this, where they may, for example, be very anxious after just being isolated at home for a while, but they go, well, I'm not a soldier or a nurse, so I'm not allowed to feel this, so I'm not going to get help. Can you respond to that?
Yes. What I would tell people who feel that is I would say trauma is not a comparison game. Do not try to compare your trauma or your loss to someone else's. Loss is loss. And again, that's why, we used that term earlier of collective trauma. All of us are going through loss, whether it's the loss of a normalcy or a milestone event or a graduation or a wedding to actual death. Loss is loss. And the prescription for it we see in Scripture seems to be similar in a variety of cases, that we move towards the Lord who understands loss, who understands what it is to be acquainted with griefs, to be a man of sorrows. And so when we come into the comparison game of, my trauma is not as bad or my loss isn't as bad, I think we actually miss out on an opportunity to draw close to others, but also draw close to the Lord who provides comfort for us in the midst of our loss.
So good. And that's the perfect moment. Again, Jonathan Holmes with Fieldstone Counseling. You all offer counseling services, not only in person, but also via video chat. How can folks get the help they need?
You can go to our website to www.fieldstonecounseling.org. That's fieldstonecounseling.org. We have information about how our video counseling works. And so really, wherever you're at, if you're not here in Northeast Ohio, you might be somewhere else, or you might have a loved one somewhere else across the nation or really across the globe who needs counseling. We offer that counseling via a variety of different telehealth services, and you can access those at our website.
Again, what's the website one more time?
fieldstonecounseling.org.
Wonderful. Jonathan Holmes, thank you again for your time and expertise today. We always love hanging with you.
All right. Thanks so much. You guys have a great morning.
Hey, hold up. Where are you going? You know you liked your time with us. You want more. So look down, hit that button right there, subscribe, and you'll get updated episodes, and then you can hang some more.
And guess what? You can help us. How? A 5-star rating.
You can also hang with us live, weekdays 6 to 9 a.m. Interact with us, talk with us. Download the Moody Radio app.
Or at brianandjanelle.org.
And we don't put all this together all by ourselves. There's some great people behind all this production. We want to thank Ron Eastwood, Kelly Ryder, Paul Carter, Doug Hayner, Mike Reynolds, and our awesome and fearless leader, Josue Villa.
And finally, this podcast is a production of Moody Radio in Cleveland, a ministry of Moody Bible Institute.
Well, Brian, that's a wrap.
Yep.